What's up YouTube, Card Boss here. Today I'm going to do something a bit unique. I got a comment from a viewer asking about how does my grading station actually looks like, considering that I've made a lot of videos about PSA grading. Now, I just want to show you guys on how crude and conventional my little workstation is. And just to give you guys some insight about some of the stuff that I'm using and some of the process that I take to look at cards. So I've got my desk here. What's actually important to me, which some of you guys may or may not have, is this synthetic leather surface that I have. Now this is something that I bought from IKEA. You can see that my table is wood, and it's just this huge piece here that I got. And it's pretty useful because it's not hard surface. It has a bit of a softness to it. It's a bit more gentle on the cards, and it's easy and nice to work with. So you can see I got some sample cards which I'm going to run through later, and stuff that you need to do grading, right? So you need some sleeves, penny sleeves. Of course, you need card savers here, penny sleeves earlier. I've got my magnifying setup here, LED setup. There's illumination as well. Right, this is only a 3x magnification, guys. So I know that some guys use a higher magnification, like 10 times, but to me 3 is good enough to pick up most of the imperfections on a card. You could go a bit deeper and to get more accurate, but it's just quite a strain on my eyesight actually. But like from my past experience, 3x or maybe 5x is actually good enough, and that's the stand that's actually attached to the table. I've got here some microfiber cloth which I use to clean the cards, and another handheld magnifying glass, which is also I believe it's 3x, so that's more of a handheld one, so I don't have to keep on looking from the top of that huge glass here. It's easy for me to just hang on, and these are the glass that I usually take out when I'm going out to have a look at collections and cards, to look at stuff. New piece which I haven't used yet is this digital microscope, and that's, I believe it's 160x. Yes, it's a bit too much, but it was quite cheap, made in China obviously. I haven't tested it out. I could probably see the fibers within a patch card. Yep. And one more thing, so I've got a ruler, right? Conventional ruler, but it has a bit of grids to it, right, which actually helps with the centering work. So I don't use any of that centering tools. It's just something conventional like this. Okay, so here's the tools. I'm just gonna cut away and just to do a bit of demonstration of what are the kind of cards that you look at, and how do you sieve through cards that you send for grading. Come back. All right, welcome back. So I'm just going to take you guys a little tutorial about grading. Now, there are a bunch of other videos about how you grade cards, but I'm just going to do a bit of different spin on this, right? So there are some of you guys who are experienced graders, right? So you guys can grade anything, but I guess some of you are pretty new to the whole grading scheme. So I'm just going to show you a bit of differences about, especially the type of cards that you can grade easily, and some which are a bit more difficult. So I've got a few sample cards here. These are not expensive cards. These are all just used for this exercise, right? So first up, I'm going to show you guys a couple of cards that you are pretty familiar with, which is the modern chrome cards. So I got a couple of prisms here, an optic. Okay, so you guys are pretty familiar with this smooth surface, shiny surface, and pretty thick cardstock. I wouldn't say super thick, but decently thick. Now these are the easiest kind of cards to grade, and why is that? Because these surfaces, if there's any imperfections such as scratches or indents and scuffs or whatever, it's easy to spot just by looking at it or taking a simple microscope to look down these. So these are stuff that's easy to go through, and the corners and edges are pretty well cut most of the time. So if there was any imperfection on the corners, it's likely that it was mishandled at some point, or maybe hit a dent in the box, which you can see in some of the modern boxes. But generally, if cards are packed fresh, chrome cards, they are in pretty good condition overall. So talking about the edges and the corners, you just have to watch out on the surface for imperfections, and the centering. Now, what do we do about centering? So if you look at these two cards individually, I'm not sure if you can see it in the video, this Blake Griffin looks a bit off-centered from right to left, from left to right. So you can see that the right edge is slightly smaller than the left one. So obviously this is not well centered just from the eye test, whereas this Andre Drummond, you could see that it's actually pretty much centered. And how you can do a second check without actually taking the tool like the ruler I showed you earlier is counting the dots. So in modern day prisms, they have the dots here. You could count the dots, from the left side and the right side, sometimes on the top corner and over here, and just compare the number of dots to make sure that they are of the same number, and that gives you a good indication. Now PSA grades are PSA 10 60-40 on the front and 90-10 on the back. So if the back's not as well centered, it's okay. PSA puts a lot more emphasis on the front. Okay, and when you look at a car like Optic, which generally has a border, that makes things a bit easier, right? So it's easy to tell if a card is off-centered. So same principles as a prism. Usually corners and edges are pretty alright. Take care of the edges for any hidden scratches, and look at the centering, do a bit of measurement. In this case, eye test is one, but if you're unsure, pick up that ruler, which is something I use, and calculate. So the grid here is actually pretty useful to see the exact measurements, right? So you could use the centering tool. I haven't used one before, but that's up to you. Now moving on to a bit more higher level of difficulty. So this is a thicker stock card. Now thicker stock cards presents a different kind of challenge. Now this is still glossy like the chrome cards before that, but thicker stock cards have generally more surface that basically more things that can go wrong. So some saw you get a bit of chipping on this side here. There isn't much here. I don't have an example that's pretty bad condition, but what it meant is there's more wear surface for it to get wear off here, and that will actually affect the grade. So generally people, even like myself, I don't generally like thicker cards, like even patch cards as well. By virtue of it being thick, it already presents a little disadvantage when it comes to grading, right? In order for you to try and get a 10. Now let's come to two examples of paper. So these are the older paper stocks cards, from the 90s, right? So colorful cards, compared to what we have today. Today is all about the gloss and the shine. But because the colors, especially on front and the back, they present a lot of wear. You can see here on the edges, right? Of course, corners, that's pretty obvious. So when you have all these kind of colored backs, purple, black, whatever, so all these wear, it comes pretty visible. Right. Sometimes it appears on the front as well. If you can see your 90s Michael Jordan cards, they look very clean from the photo, but when you bring it up close, these are where everything all pops up. So be careful when buying 90s cards if you intend to send them from grading, because chances are, I would say like 90% of the time, you would have some sort of imperfection just due to the card quality back then. Some guys would say that I bought it packed fresh, put it into the sleeves, kept it in a box for 20 years, but it's just the make back then isn't as pinpoint or precise or laser cut, I would say, compared to today. Another one I touch on why I bring up this pack of cards is the hologram. So holograms were quite a thing back then, but they have imperfections. Like see this Derek Harper here, you can see like a little dot here, and that's something you can't remove, right? Okay, I'm going to talk about cleaning after this. So the card itself, the choice of card itself makes a lot of difference on what kind of cards you want to send for grading, depending on your experience. So for new graders, I would generally like to stick to modern day cards. Of course, modern day cards in terms of pricing and value creation, it's actually not as great as older cards, and it's for that reason, because it's actually hard to get good quality cards from the 90s, to get into PSA 10s, and that's why you have a huge premium as compared to a modern card. Okay, so now let's look at these few. What do we do normally, right? So I'll just take this Andre Drummond for example. So normally when I have a card like this and I want to grade it, okay, you generally don't want to hold a card like that and just get all your smudges on top. Okay, so when you pick up a card, normally you pick it up like that or this way. Okay, so that you don't get any of your fingerprints on top. My fingers are generally slightly oily. I don't know about you guys, but I do get smudges on my cards if I were to put my fingers on top. Okay, so before I actually start the process, I'll always lay a piece of microfiber cloth at the bottom like that, and then I'll just bring the card here. So first test usually for me is the eye appeal test, right? So I'll look at it, if let's say the eye appeal is way off, it's way off, right? But if let's say the eye appeal test is generally fine, first thing I'll pick up the card and check for surface imperfections, whether or not if there's any scratches or dents. That's pretty obvious, right? And let's say there is one, normally I'll just dismiss it straight away, because surface imperfections generally is a PSA 8, 9 if you're lucky, but most of the time 8. So assuming no imperfections, card looks clean, corners, edges looks fine. Okay, maybe if you want to take your magnifying glass to recheck the corners, you could. All right, it's good to always recheck. And if you're happy with that and generally looks okay, take out your centering ruler just to make sure that the centerings confirm your visual test, right? And that's fine. Then you do a little bit of cleaning, taking a microfiber cloth, hold up with the corner here, and start to just gently rub this way, right? And then also don't forget the corner that you covered earlier, so just do it this way on a circular motion. And don't forget to do the back as well. So again, hold the card from the side like this, so you don't get any of your smudges there. Simple. So once you're done, get a penny sleeve. Make sure you get a clean one. Okay, try not to use any recycled sleeves, because that defeats the purpose. You don't want to have dust stuck from the old sleeves getting there. Get the sleeves in like that. Take the card saver, slot it in, and voila, done. Normally what I do is, every time I have a group of cards self-grading, once I pack, there's like a dozen of these or whatever, I'll do one final check. Like I'll get all the stack of stuff that I'm going to self-grading and just have one more eye check, and put it under the light, just have a look, just to make sure everything's cool before sending it out. And hopefully, based on my experience, right, you don't try to aim for all 10s, right? That's theoretically impossible. Yeah, we are hopeful, right? So my general assumption that I would like to get at least 40% correct, right? So I always keep records of all my PSA results. That just shows on how much you're improving in terms of your reviewing skills, right? So the higher percentage, obviously you're doing your stuff, but then of course it comes down to the card quality that you're buying. So if you look back at my early PSA video that I did last week, I believe, right? So 2 steps, right? One is actually the raw that you buy to, through practice, you're able to identify raw that can send for grading, and the other one is actually grading the card itself, or reviewing the card itself before you send for grading. So it takes some time to get practice and to get those 2 steps right, but if you get those right, chances are you get your higher gem rate. Alright, hope this has been educational for you guys. I'm pretty sure there's a lot more experienced graders who have a bunch more sophisticated tools. This is just my crude way, but it's been working for me, and it's a very small setup, very cheap setup, and hope you guys found this beneficial. Like and subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Talk again soon. Cardboard's out.